Hi, this is Mike Fry, and I'm coming to you from my home in beautiful Montpelier, Vermont, a state that's been all abuzz about bears for the last few years. No, I'm not talking about those kind of bears. I love those too. I'm talking about these kind of bears. Animal rights advocates and hunters have been on opposite sides of a heated debate, and I'm about to upset both groups and shed some important insight from my personal experiences with bears. Stick with me. This is going to get very interesting. To be clear, black bears are one of my favorite species of non-human animal that I've had the opportunity to experience up close and personal in multiple settings. They are spectacular, intelligent, and beautiful creatures that frequently inspire fear in the people who encounter them. But the data shows we have little to no reason to actually fear black bears, though they most certainly deserve our respect and admiration. Black bears are, in fact, very good at avoiding humans, even when they live very close to them. So much so that even in a rural and wild state like Vermont, the thriving bear population here results in nearly zero actual contact with human beings. This graph, provided by Protect Our Wildlife Vermont of data obtained by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, clearly shows that out of just more than 500 bear encounters by people in 2021, 517 of those were categorized as, quote, bear seen, no incident, end quote. Nearly all of the other categories were descriptions like, quote, bear in garden, end quote, or bear eating apples, end quote. The most common of these categories, unsurprisingly, was bear at garbage. For most people, the categories they find most problematic include 2 cases of bears entering houses, more on those in just a minute, and 13 cases of damaged property, which certainly includes things like stolen bird feeders, broken garbage cans, but could also include more serious damage to property. The data doesn't really say, so we just don't know. It has to be emphasized, though, that out of these more than 500 so-called bear encounters, only 13 of them included any kind of property damage at all. In other words, with thousands of black bears living in close proximity to more than 600,000 humans, there are, year after year, virtually no real actual problems the bears have caused. The data also clearly shows that when problematic encounters do occur, it's almost always the people who created the problem. Like, for example, this viral video spread around almost everywhere by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, showing a bear caught on security camera entering an outbuilding of a home. While I've seen this video showing up practically every place during the recent hype about Vermont bears, I have yet to hear anyone point out the obvious. The bear easily entered the building because the door was unlatched. They also didn't point out that it was food inside the door that lured the bear in. They also didn't report if there was or wasn't any damage resulting from this incident, which suggests to me that there probably was none, although I don't know for sure. While Fish and Wildlife have been busy hyping these bear encounters, usually in the most sensational possible ways, they've also been running around for years practically begging people to report more bear sightings. You can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the television without seeing him do it. They say things like people need to protect themselves from bears, and that if they report bear sightings, Fish and Wildlife will help keep them safe. I guess that's all well and good, and maybe well intended. It's really hard to say for sure. If it is well intended, they certainly wouldn't need to use the sensational language that they're using to describe what are, in effect, harmless encounters with bears.
Hey! Bears! Get off the hammock.
But the problem is worse than that, because while hyping up bear encounters and using a constant drumbeat of practically begging people to call whenever they see a bear, they're also using those increased reportings that they themselves are creating in order to insist that there are growing problems with bears. Regardless of whether their intentions are pure or corrupt, they are objectively creating a kind of self-perpetuating circular logic that can only go in one direction. It is not in any way objective or scientifically based. So a rational person would want to ask, why would Vermont Fish and Wildlife want to hype up bear numbers and encounters? One likely answer seems to be that it's because the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Board is comprised entirely of hunters and trappers. And in spite of their overt conflicts of interests, one legislator told me that a few years ago there was an effort to expand the board to include other kinds of people like biologists, ecologists, and animal advocates. The effort to include these more objective wildlife stakeholders on the board was met by fierce resistance. I wonder why. Well, part of the answer can be found in some emails obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests between people in the Fish and Wildlife Department, in which they admit in writing that they have no real scientific data about the carrying capacity of bears in Vermont. To be blunt, they don't even really know how many there actually are here and how many there should be. But a very well-connected hunter, who is also a former Fish and Wildlife Board chair, has petitioned the current board to double the allowed take of bears each year from 1 to 2 per hunter. They've also requested the extension of the, quote, hunting season well into December, during bears' denning season. I'll explain why I put hunting in air quotes in just a minute. Before I get into explaining how devastating these proposed changes could be to bears, I first need to tell you about some of my personal experiences with wild bears. I first experienced wild black bears in the mid-1970s when I was privileged to participate in groups that visited bear dens in the middle of the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota. We were accompanying biologists who were digging out bear dens of radio-collared bears so the bears could be tranquilized and medical data collected from them. Blood samples, skin scrapings would be taken, the bears would be weighed, and then their collars would be replaced with new ones. They would then be tucked back into their dens, the dens carefully restored to their original condition, and they would be left to finish their hibernation in peace. The first den I visited contained a mother and 3 cubs. The second held a mom and 2 cubs. It was also very clear from these experiences that mother bears slept through at least 2 winters with each set of cubs because young bears are dependent on their mothers for such long periods of time. Extreme care needed to be taken doing this research because disturbing bears' hibernation, which I have to say isn't really hibernation, it's a torpor, but the details of that are probably better left for another video on another day. People generally call it hibernation, so I will just say that disturbing a bear during hibernation is often fatal. So we needed to be fastidious about doing this work. I also worked with black bear when I served as the rehabilitation manager at the Howell Wildlife Center in Seattle, Washington, where my favorite patient was a male wild black bear that came to us emaciated, dehydrated, and with a severe case of mange. After a long recovery, he was eventually released with a radio collar before being killed by a hunter, in spite of the fact that he was wearing bright ear tags and a radio collar. With those and other experiences with bears and wildlife, I have to say that these proposed changes to bear hunting rules in Vermont are potentially devastating to bears. They're poorly thought out, and their own wording is even contradictory. For example, the rules say it's not allowed to intentionally hunt a mother bear with cubs, as if they're trying to protect mother bears. The killing of the mother bear could result in the killing of 3, 4, maybe 5 bears. The doubling of the possible bear take is a foolish and risky thing to those interested in healthy bear populations. But that's nowhere near as problematic as it would be to extend hunting into the hibernation season. Think about this. If these rule changes go into effect, hunters, again in air quotes, which again I'll explain soon, will be able to use packs of dogs to sniff out hibernating bears. And again, it's actually not hibernation, it's torpor or super hibernation, during which these bears may not eat, drink, urinate, or defecate for up to 7 months. They would then dig out these effectively captive, sleeping, or practically comatose animals to kill. And of course, if it turns out that they've dug out a mother and she's got cubs, then they have to say, oh, well, I can't shoot that one. I'll have to move along to kill another one, thereby leaving that whole family there to die. At this point, do I even have to say that using dogs to find sleeping bears so you can shoot their torpid, nearly lifeless bodies isn't exactly my definition of, quote, hunting? At its very best, that is unsportsmanlike. I could also describe it as cowardly, unmanly, lazy. You decide for yourself what you'd like to call it. Okay, so now that I've angered the Vermont Board of Wildlife, let me take some time to upset the animal rights advocates among us, because I also have to add that I actually have no problem with hunting. I personally am an omnivore. I eat meat. I even eat the meat of species that I adore. Before I moved to Vermont, for example, I kept chickens and loved chickens, but I also like to eat some chicken. Ironically, so do chickens, but that's, again, another video for another day. Some of my absolute favorite species of animals are obligate carnivores that kill and eat other animals, and I don't judge them for it. I also feel very strongly that responsibly and humanely harvesting wild meat from healthy ecosystems is probably far more sustainable and humane than the other ways humans raise and acquire most of their meat. But these proposed rule changes are nothing like rational, sustainable, and humane harvesting of wild meat. And if you look past the non-scientific, overly hyped sensationalism being pushed out by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department to what will actually happen if these new rules go into effect, that is abundantly clear. There's one last factor I need to explain. While we have no real information on actual population numbers or carrying capacities in Vermont, I'm willing to concede that bear populations have likely increased in recent years. That's almost certainly because of a series of shorter and warmer winters. Then last year, while it was a bit colder than some of the prior years, there was a really great snowpack. Temperatures and snowpack are the two factors that most affect the survivability of bears through their long winter sleep. All it would take is one really bad winter with a period of bitter cold and little snowpack to wipe out a large chunk of the population. That isn't complicated. It's basic biology and ecology. Setting a responsible harvest limit should not involve setting the number to accommodate the bountiful years. They need to be set to account for the challenging years, even if those challenging years only come once every 5 or 10 years. That is how responsible wildlife management policy works. Sadly, that is not the path Vermont Fish and Wildlife are on as they aggressively push for these changes to the rules. If you agree with me, like and share this video. Contact your Vermont legislators and demand that they get involved. Contact Vermont Fish and Wildlife and express your opinion, and attend the public hearings that are coming up on this topic. And follow Protect Our Wildlife Vermont to stay informed. And thanks for watching.